So,
Right.
Brenda, you are a forgiveness coach. Can you explain to people what that is?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So a forgiveness coach is someone who takes a person through, for me, it's a 5-step process that you can get to. So for instance, if you're feeling any kind of anger, resentment, or you're just feeling stuck in life, what we do is we take people through a 5-step process that helps them to move through the energy of the story, to bring it to a place of reframing so that they have a choice of whether they want to hold on to it or let it go.
Yeah. Now, what about, does that process work, you think, for people that have been like stuck in resentment for a long, long time? Like, do you ever work with people that have like been holding on to something that is, decades old?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, most of the people that I do work with, it's decades old. It's to do with family, right? It's a lot to do with family. So, but what the interesting thing is they don't realize it's decades old. A lot of people, because they're dealing with a current situation and they don't understand it goes back decades.
Okay. And sometimes they do, and it keeps coming up into the present, and they're not sure like how they're ever going to get free of it. And you're saying that there are ways for us to get free of it, but we have to kind of surrender into a process to help ourselves get free of this.
Exactly.
So how did you get drawn to forgiveness work for your work?
So, it's kind of funny. We teach what we need to learn, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or at least can. And I fell into it naturally. I had gone through my 3rd divorce, very painful. And I was looking at my life and finally realizing I was the common denominator, but I don't know what that meant. And so I had thrown myself into some different healing modalities and really started searching for what are these patterns and beliefs? What is this stuff coming up? And all this while, I am trying to forgive my ex, right? And move on, because that's what you learn in forgiveness, right? Traditional forgiveness is, really you kind of just need to let bygones be bygones, let it go, move on. But every time I saw a darn Metro bus, I would start crying. So I was triggered every time because he was a Metro bus driver.
Oh.
I was consistently being triggered. I thought I'd make progress and then I'd fall back, or somebody looks like him and I would start to feel like, oh, and it was just this pattern. So I was working really hard. And finally, and I was making some progress after a while, but finally I came down to where it was kind of synchronistic in the sense that I realized my boss was like my ex-husband. So I was constantly in this pattern of not being good enough, not being able to, I'm always having to prove myself. And my body finally ended up with a back fusion and a neck fusion because of the stress.
Wow.
It was during that time that I found forgiveness work.
Wow. Yeah. It is so often our physical bodies give us signals that are like, they pull the plug on us. Our bodies pull the plug and say,
absolutely.
No more.
Absolutely.
Wow. And so you found the forgiveness work. Now now you're a coach for forgiveness work, obviously, because it worked. I mean, you wouldn't be so passionate about doing this with people unless you saw that it changes your life. It changes other people's lives.
It does. It really does. Because it gives you an easy way, right? Well, a simple way. It gives you a simple way to go through forgiveness. And what I teach, being a 5-step process, you don't have to wonder or guess. For me, it worked because it gave my head something to do so that my heart could heal.
Oh, I love that line. Gave your head something to do so that your heart could finally heal. Oh, that's beautiful. So I think where your work and my work connects is that I try to keep boundary work really simple too. I mean, forgiveness work can sound very complicated. It can sound really difficult to do, especially if you've been carrying issues that have been with you for a long, long time and you feel like you just can't get free of them or released from them. And boundary work can feel difficult the same way. People tend to come to it and feel like, I don't have any boundaries, I can't set any boundaries, it's not working. And it can be a really challenging concept. And I like to break it down and make it really simple. And I think that's why I was drawn to you, because I also see that you're making the forgiveness process a really simple process. And I think that then makes it something people can practice with themselves, right?
Right.
So how do you see boundaries coming up in forgiveness work when people are doing forgiveness work? Where does the concept of your yeses and nos fit into that?
Well, what I find most of the time is there haven't been any boundaries. You know, a lot of people have grown up without boundaries. They're trying to figure them out, but they don't have them. So the energy is kind of bleeding into other things and to other people. Like a lot of people have not had boundaries with themselves and other people. So for instance, the parents or the siblings or the spouse or the ex-spouse. And so with the yeses and nos, they haven't known. That's why I think this blends so well together, because first off, we have to start with some basics. You know, what do we know about boundaries and what not? Do we have them? Do we not? And that's all in the story, right? In the story that I listen to, it's like, okay, what's coming up? What's happening? Are you aware? And most people will share. They're like going, I don't even know what a boundary is, or I think I have a boundary, but this person keeps crossing it.
Well, I just had this like huge aha moment, because one of the things that I see when people are, have been struggling with trying to understand boundaries or not feeling like they had them is that they get really resentful in their relationships. And I think the same thing happens from what you're saying with when we're not able to forgive, we're carrying a lot of resentment.
Yeah.
And so this is possibly where these two things really intersect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's beautifully said. And it's true, because we blame, right? When we're not ready, when we don't want to take responsibility, when it's our job to have those boundaries.
and if you never knew how to have those boundaries, or you never felt like you could set those boundaries and that you didn't know how, it does set you up in all of your relationships to feel very resentful, because really then other people are setting the boundaries for you or for the relationship, and they're probably not the boundaries that you want. So I think we have found the place where these things connect. And
Yeah.
I have one final question for you. Is there something you would suggest if someone feels stuck or angry when they hear the word forgiveness? Just the word itself. Like many people feel angry sometimes.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that person to help them kind of pass that feeling of initially anger and went just from the word?
Oh, yeah, just from the word. In fact, I just talked with a gal recently about that. And it was where the word forgiveness really gave her, she had a story attached to it from her mom would be praying and asking for forgiveness while she's in pain, suffering. So as a little girl, she acquired this thought that forgiveness means suffering. It's fascinating what our stories are around these words. And so what I suggest people do is, you don't have to use the word forgiveness, but is there another word that your heart can feel? So for instance, acceptance. Can I learn to be in acceptance of people's behaviors? Or can I learn to be in acceptance that these things happen to me? Can I learn to be in acceptance of life?
Of the things that we sometimes cannot change.
No. And so it's
That's
like
so helpful, Brenda. This is so helpful to hear that, if the word forgiveness just makes you angry, that there may be other words or other parts of what the work means that you can connect to. And again, I see the same thing with boundary work, because People don't always relate to the word boundaries. They don't, they automatically see it as a no. They don't see it as a yes and a no, that it's about boundaries are about your yeses and your nos. And so getting away from sometimes the word and moving to it's just your yeses and nos, let's talk about those.
Yes.
Makes it easier for people to approach what has been a really tough subject. So I love that, to work on forgiveness, you're saying, if the word is really hard for you, there are still other ways through the process that the word doesn't have to have all of that to it, but it is important for people to look at. Do you have and maybe that's what we'll leave our listeners with right now. Do you have a story in your head about forgiveness? What's your story?